All right, welcome back to This Explainer. Today we are looking at a completely pivotal and honestly highly dramatic moment in history. We're going to uncover a story of just immense courage, a literal high-stakes diplomatic battle, and a profound display of integrity. We're talking about the historic migration to Abyssinia. So let's dive right in and see how holding firmly to the truth can absolutely shatter even the most elaborate political plots.
Okay, let's dive into this. I want you to just imagine the immense stakes for a second. You've got this small, highly vulnerable group of early Muslims, right? They're being hunted down, tortured, and starved in their very own hometown. To literally just survive, they have to leave absolutely everything behind and seek asylum. But here's the catch. They are putting their lives entirely in the hands of a Christian king in a completely foreign land. No wealth, zero political leverage, and definitely no backup plan. They are relying solely on this one king's reputation for absolute justice.
To really wrap our heads around why this happened, we got to step back to the 5th year of prophethood, so around 615 CE. The burning sands of Mecca had essentially become a pressure cooker of unbearable persecution for these early Muslims. And it wasn't just the weak and poor who were suffering anymore. Even the new believers, coming from really prominent families, were facing just a mountain of cruelty. The situation had basically reached a boiling point. Trapped and facing this relentless physical and psychological abuse from the Quraysh, who were the ruling tribe of Mecca, they desperately needed an escape route.
So seeing his followers suffer so intensely, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, showcased some truly brilliant strategic wisdom here. He gave them a very specific, visionary command. He told them to go to Abyssinia. Now why there? Well, because as he noted, its ruler, King Negus, or Aishama, was a man who, quote, will not tolerate oppression. Notice how the Prophet specifically highlighted that Abyssinia was a land of truth. He trusted the justice of this Christian king implicitly. He really believed Allah would provide them a way out of their profound distress through him.
Now, leaving literally everything you know, your home, your wealth, your extended family, is a deeply traumatic experience, right? But these migrants were given this immense divine comfort. Verses from Surah An-Nahl were revealed, basically promising that those who migrate for the sake of Allah, after being violently wronged, well, they'd be given a goodly home in this world and an even greater reward in the hereafter. So this divine reassurance, it became the exact emotional and spiritual fuel they needed to take on this absolutely terrifying journey across the Red Sea straight into the unknown.
And it's pretty incredible just how small this first group actually was. We're talking just 10 or 11 men and maybe 4 or 5 women. This was definitely not some grand exodus. It was a highly stealthy, extremely dangerous escape. They had to slip out of Mecca completely under the radar, moving under the cover of darkness just to reach the sea. Because if they were caught by the Quraysh, man, the punishment would have been exceptionally severe. They were incredibly vulnerable, carrying literally nothing but their faith. But among this brave, quiet little caravan were some incredibly notable figures. The group actually included the 3rd Caliph of Islam, Uthman bin Affan, and his wife, Ruqayyah, who was the beloved daughter of the Prophet Muhammad. And it's a beautiful historical parallel, really, because the Prophet honored Uthman by stating he was the very first person since the Prophet Lut to migrate with his entire family purely for the sake of Allah, which really just highlights the deep spiritual pedigree of this very first group of refugees.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the dramatic jump in numbers. So a little while later, a second, much larger migration took place. This time, about 83 or 84 migrants made the journey, and they were led by the brilliant and eloquent Ja'far ibn Abi Talib. And, exactly as the Prophet had promised, King Negus received them with just exceptional grace. He granted them asylum, full religious freedom, and treated them with deep respect and peace. So for the first time in years, the Muslims could actually breathe. But, well, of course, the Quraysh back in Mecca were absolutely not going to just let this happen.
Yeah, the Quraysh were absolutely enraged that their victims had managed to find a safe haven. So what do? They launch a massive diplomatic counterattack. They send 2 of their absolute sharpest political operators, Amr bin al-As and Abdullah bin Abi Rabi'a. And they definitely didn't show up empty-handed. They brought literal crates of highly expensive gifts for King Negus, and perhaps even more importantly, they systematically distributed bribes to the king's generals and priests. Their goal was simple, yet ruthless: buy the court's influence and demand the immediate extradition of the Muslims back to Mecca to face torture.
The Quraysh's strategy, once they got into the Abyssinian court, was remarkably calculated. Step 1, frame the Muslims as these rebellious, foolish youths who had just abandoned the respectable religion of their forefathers to invent some strange new cult, a cult that neither the Meccans nor the Abyssinians recognized. Then, step 2, which they kept hidden as their trump card, spring a theological trap. They wanted to force the Muslims to state their beliefs about Jesus, knowing full well it would differ from Orthodox Christian doctrine, and hopefully turn the Christian king entirely against them. So the crucial point is the sheer, unshakable integrity of King Negus. I mean, despite the lavish gifts, and despite his own priests actively urging him to hand the refugees over, the king flatly refused. He swore by Allah that he would absolutely not hand over people who had sought his protection without first summoning them and hearing their side of the story. He declared, "Look, if the accusations are true, fine, but if not, I will protect them." This strict demand for a fair trial completely derailed the Quraysh's plan of a quick, bribed extradition.
So the Muslims are summoned to this grand court, and they decide right then and there that they will speak nothing but the absolute truth taught by their prophet. Ja'far ibn Abi Talib steps forward and delivers what is honestly one of the most magnificent speeches in history, painting this incredibly powerful contrast for the king. On the left side, the days of ignorance, worshipping idols, eating dead animals, breaking family ties, and the strong basically devouring the weak. But on the right side, the transformation brought by Islam, commanding them to speak the truth, keep trusts, be merciful, and avoid bloodshed. He just beautifully summarized the moral light they had embraced.
And the king is deeply moved by this moral framework, so he asks Ja'far, "Do you have with you any of the revelation that your prophet brought from Allah?" Ja'far says yes, and begins to recite from Surah Maryam, the chapter of Mary. In this beautifully resonant voice, he recites the opening verses about the prophet Zechariah, an old man secretly and tearfully calling out to his Lord for an heir, never once losing hope in Allah's mercy. And you could imagine, right, in a royal Christian court, these familiar, deeply reverent stories of biblical figures immediately struck a profound chord.
And this brilliantly illustrates the profound bridge Ja'far was building. He then smoothly continued into the verses detailing the miraculous virgin birth of Jesus, known as Isa in Islam. He recited how Mary, in the agonizing pain of childbirth and feeling just entirely alone, was actually comforted by an angel. She was told not to grieve and was provided with a flowing stream and fresh dates straight from a palm tree. The profound respect, love, and divine purity attributed to Mary and Jesus in these Islamic verses literally echoed through the silent halls of the Abyssinian court. The emotional impact here was just absolute. King Negus and even the initially hostile priests, the ones who had literally been bribed by the Quraysh, they began to weep. History records they wept until their beards were completely soaked with tears. The king then picked up a small twig from the ground and made this historic declaration. He said, "By Allah, what Jesus brought and what this recitation contains come from the exact same lamp." He instantly recognized the shared divine origin of their faiths, meaning the Quraysh's first plan had just spectacularly failed. But the tension doesn't end there. Let's move to Walvan and see how this builds on the very next day. Because the Quraysh envoy, Amr ibn al-As, who is humiliated at this point but definitely not defeated, decides to trigger his ultimate trap. He goes back to the king and says, "Hey, these Muslims say a terrible, monstrous thing about Jesus, son of Mary. Call them and ask them what they believe." He really wanted to expose the fact that Muslims do not believe Jesus is the literal Son of God. He calculated that this theological difference would finally enrage the Christian king enough to order their execution or at least their extradition. So the Muslims are summoned yet again, and the tension in that room must have been incredibly high. They are asked directly about Jesus. And Ja'far, he doesn't flinch. He doesn't sugarcoat it, he doesn't compromise, and he certainly doesn't hide their beliefs just to save his own skin. He confidently declares the absolute Islamic creed. He says, "We say about him exactly what our prophet brought to us. He is the servant of Allah, his messenger, his word, and his spirit which he cast into the pure Virgin Mary." It was a fearless, uncompromising, and yet deeply respectful statement of truth.
The entire courtroom essentially holds its breath. King Negus reaches down and picks up another small twig. And despite the murmurs and shouts of his own priests, he looks right at Ja'far and says, "By Allah, Jesus, the son of Mary, does not exceed what you have said by the length of this twig." He publicly validated their faith. The king then ordered the Quraysh's expensive bribes to be thrown right back in their faces, driving them out of his court in total disgrace, and he granted the Muslims eternal, unconditional safety in his kingdom. Just an incredible turn of events.
This entire remarkable historical event leaves us with such a powerful reflection. I mean, think about it. These early Muslims gave up their homes, their wealth, and their safety to hold on to their faith, completely surrounded by enemies. But because they stood so firmly by the truth, Allah opened a seemingly impossible door in a foreign land, softening the heart of a just king to protect them. Have you ever noticed that in your own life? Like when you make a difficult, principled choice for the sake of Allah, how impossible doors suddenly swing open? I would absolutely love to hear your thoughts on this. Share your reflections in the comments below. And hey, if you found this explainer as fascinating as I did, please like and subscribe so we can keep diving into these incredible topics together.